unions, and welcome to the CUInsight Network. My name is Robbie Young. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Growth here at CUInsight, and it's my job on this show to have conversations with thought leaders who support the credit union community. We'll identify issues affecting credit unions and discuss best practices that help us learn from one another and strengthen our credit union ecosystem. My guest on today's show is Jeremy DeBruin, Senior Area Vice President at Gallagher. Jeremy, thanks so much for being here.
Robbie, it's my pleasure. I'm excited to join you.
Yeah. So to jump right in, most of us didn't think we'd get to work with credit unions. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I guess if you asked me as a little boy, I would have told you I wanted to play shortstop for the Oakland A's, which was my favorite baseball team growing up. But I honestly didn't really have any serious aspirations. I grew up in the kind of the bluest of blue collar environments. In fact, I didn't know one single person who went to college. And so careers like, attorneys and doctors and finance professionals, they just seemed so foreign to me that they almost as if they didn't exist. I did, however, have a fascination with the stock market of all things as a kid. I remember watching the evening news, and I always paid attention to the sports and to the business part of the news. And it was just fascinating to me to see videos from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange with folks waving their fingers and making trades based on hand signals and the ticker going across the room there. That just seemed really cool to me as a youngster. And I had a paper route when I was a kid, and I remember every morning I would wake up and first I would open up the box scores to see how my favorite baseball players did the night before, and then I would turn to the stock pages and I would look at a couple different companies. My dad was a boiler mechanic at Campbell Soup, so I always checked to see how Campbell Soup stock did every morning. And there's a few others that I like to follow. So I guess you could say that if I had kind of an aspiration or something that was fascinating to me, it would have been the stock market, maybe a stockbroker or something along those lines.
I love the idea of thinking of like a young you running home at the dinner table and just being like, Dad, Campbell Soup stock is killing it right now.
Yeah, that dinner table was often filled with Campbell Soup.
Yeah, I bet. So can you talk to us a little bit about what your journey was like to the current role as Senior Area Vice President at Gallagher?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, you talked about not aspiring or not really knowing that you were going to end up in the credit union space. One of my earliest childhood memories, one of my core memories from being a kid actually involved credit unions, interestingly enough. I didn't realize it at the time that I'd end up in the business. But see, my mom was what I would call a financial wizard. As I mentioned, we were very blue collar and money was very tight. And Dad got paid every other Thursday. And I remember the routine growing up was Friday, Mom would pick me up from school and we would drive to the bank. She would cash Dad's check and she would bring home some cash. And then she'd sit at the kitchen table with a bunch of envelopes and she would put money in the different envelopes. I mean, she was Dave Ramsey before he made that cool. I remember those moments, those Friday afternoons were all often pretty stressful for my mom. It was clear, even from a youngster's perspective, that the envelopes needed more cash than often went into them. But I remember one particular Friday afternoon where it was especially stressful. My mom had been crying. Clearly, something was a little bit different. And then the next Friday that we went to the bank, we drove right past the Bank of America that we had historically gone to every other Friday for forever and pulled up to this new building. It was a credit union. I don't know if I can say the name of the credit union, but they're a Sacramento credit union. And my parents were a member of that credit union ever since. And what had happened was my mom had written a check and inadvertently sent it in a little earlier than she was planning on. It bounced. And I think she got it was like a $15 insufficient funds fee from the bank. I remember that, at that time, that was a huge deal for our family. I mean, that would provide breakfast for the kids for a week. I've been a member of a credit union ever since. And it was at that moment that I realized that, my parents made a decision to switch because there was something different about credit unions and they prioritized people like my parents over the banks. And so I've always had an affinity for credit unions because I recognized from a young age that kind of changed my parents' life to a small degree, but in a very meaningful way. So in terms of my journey to work with Gallagher, as I mentioned, I didn't have like many lofty aspirations. I went through high school and never really intended on going to college. I did serve a 2-year mission for my church when I was 19 years old, and I ended up in New York City of all places. And I was surrounded by similar people from all over the world with similar age. And what I found when I was in New York City was my eyes were opened. I was talking to people who came from different backgrounds who, some of them had already gone to a college for a year. Most of them were planning on going to college when they got back. And so it was the first time in my life that I actually considered something beyond just kind of going home and, finding a similar blue collar type job that my dad had worked in for decades. And so I came home and I enrolled in a junior college and transferred to a 4-year school later in Southern California. And while I was at that 4-year school, I met a guy whose dad was a executive benefits consultant in the bank space. And so right out of college, I went and crunched numbers for this compensation consultant that worked with banks. That was my first exposure to executives benefits. That was my first exposure to the real world, so to speak. And about 4 years into that, I got a call from a gentleman named Rich Brock, who I think a lot of people in the credit union industry know that name. He's a bit of an icon in our industry, especially when it comes to executive benefits. And he was going to be in Southern California and asked if he could meet with me. And we had lunch and he told me all about what he was doing in credit unions with executive benefits. And he asked me if I would want to come and help him out. And so I made the decision to go work with Rich. At the time, we were Burns, Fozzie, Brock. We had about 27 credit union clients. We have over 600 now as Gallagher. But I started out as a client service person for Burns, Fozzie, Brock, administering and providing the service and the ongoing support to the executive benefit plans that we had implemented.
Wow. I feel like much of that story could have been written by somebody. It all sounded very credit union and how you kind of fell into that.
Yeah, it's a good home for a guy like me.
I like it. So can you tell us a little bit more about Gallagher and where and how they add value to credit unions?
Yeah, so Gallagher focuses on designing, implementing, and administering benefits to credit union executives. So we work exclusively with credit unions, and our sole focus is on helping credit unions make decisions to retain their key leadership and then, importantly, provide the ongoing service and administrative support to those plans. We spend a lot of time educating boards and executives about their options. We pride ourselves on being true consultants when it comes to executive benefits. There's a lot of executive benefit plans that are kind of designed around a specific product or require a specific product in order for them to work. We like to take the approach of trying to help understand what a credit union needs and then craft something around those needs that will produce the best advantages to the members of the organization. So we're very ongoing administrative service and support focused, and we're very consultative in our approach to the work that we do.
So Gallagher emphasizes a long-term mindset and fulfilling promises over time. How does that philosophy shape the way you partner with credit union boards and leadership teams today?
Yeah. So a lot of time when we are working specifically with boards on an executive benefit plan, there's a flurry of activity and analysis and discussion that happens around getting the plan put together and implemented. It's a very busy time. A lot of those implementations are driven by a product selection. And so there's a lot of aspects to our job that feels like it's a sale. But in actuality, what we are committed to at Gallagher is exactly that long-term mindset. We want to do the right thing for our credit union clients, and then we want to stay and be accountable for the decisions that we help them make through the duration.
So succession and leadership continuity are top of mind for credit unions right now. What are you seeing the strongest organizations do differently to prepare for the future?
My first thought is it starts with the board. I see a lot of boards trying to focus on attracting younger board members with different perspectives, different generational perspectives to the discussions. That's often, as you well know, very challenging given most younger people have very, very busy lives. It's hard to fit in volunteer work, but I think that is a key distinction between credit unions who are really preparing for the future and thinking about what their organization is going to look like for the next 10, 15, 20 years, trying to attract young talent at the board level. And then when it comes to the leadership of the organization, the C-suite, those who are really setting the culture of the organization, I think being mindful of succession planning is critical. Over 50% of credit union CEOs are over 55, and I think something like 30% are over 60. And so we're going to see a wave of change in the next decade, especially in the corner office. And so being mindful of creating an organization that's attractive for young executive talent is critical. And part of that is obviously compensation, but a lot of it is really driven by culture and opportunity. So credit unions want to stay nimble and focused on growth and be exciting, energetic places to work. And that all kind of plays into the succession planning mindset.
In a business built on trust and long-term relationships, what are the challenges or responsibilities that stay top of mind for you? And how does that commitment shape the experience credit unions have with Gallagher?
Yeah, Robbie, I love that question because trust is something that can only be built by consistently doing the right thing over an extended period of time. And then also having a high degree of competence in the work that you're doing. And it takes a long, long time to build that trust, but it can also be completely evaporated with one bad decision. And so trust is the most valuable commodity that we as consultants to credit unions have. And so I would say that the thing that we try to focus on to preserve and maintain trust is always putting our clients' interests above our own. We try to always focus on the long term. There's lots of new products that get introduced, especially in the executive benefits space. And you'll find that Gallagher is often not an early adopter of those products, if an ever adopter. I like to think of our organization a bit like a Apple computer. There was 100 different MP3 players before the iPod came out and a bunch of different cell phones before the iPhone came out. But Apple had a way of understanding the marketplace, taking their time and refining the product. And I think that that's really what we do to maintain trust is we might not have the flashiest new product, but a lot of that is because we haven't fully vetted it or become comfortable with it as something that we could recommend to our clients. And then obviously being around to keep the promises that you make when you're implementing a plan is of critical importance. And so we have an organization that we've established. There's frontline folks like us who do the consulting and have a lot of engagement with the organization while the plans are being implemented. But then we also have a team of people who will continue to do the ongoing service and administration. And, I personally like to stay involved in those annual board reviews. It gives me an opportunity to come back and, retell the story, to be accountable for the work that was done prior. And all of that, I think, is critical to maintaining trust and a good reputation in our business.
So to pull on that thread a little bit more, what's one behind the scenes part of your work that credit union leaders may not always see, but plays a key role in helping Gallagher deliver on those long-term commitments?
I've said this to a couple colleagues several times. I just wish there was a way that credit union executives and boards could feel and understand just how much I personally care about the long-term success of the work that I do. And obviously that's behind the scenes because those are involving my thoughts and I can do what I can to try and demonstrate that. But I just don't really feel like they always truly understand just to what depth it matters to me and the work that I do matters to me. But in terms of behind the scenes, I have to talk about the cast of characters that support us out in the field. There is so much work that goes into something that we present to a board or an executive. And there's so much analytical work. There's so much information. There's just iteration after iteration after iteration to make sure that we understand and that we're stress testing and we're we're figuring out the best possible solution. So it's really the team behind the scenes that most credit union executives and board members never get to meet. They don't know. They may see a name on an email here or there, but they are really the ones that provide the scaffolding and the foundational support for the not just the success of implementing the plan, but importantly, the long-term success of administering the plan.
I think that's so interesting. And I think that people listening, especially hearing your part of your journey and just what that credit union difference meant to your mom in a moment when she needed it, I think it would be very easy as a credit union executive to really feel why the work matters to you so much.
Yeah, it really does. And especially the work that those people did, because that's where I started from. I mean, as I started in my career as an analyst, running and crunching those same numbers. And then I moved into client service, where I was responsible for making the trains run on time and getting the credit unions all the information they needed to properly account for and to be compliant with the plans that were implemented. And I know personally the value of that work, and that people are currently doing for us. And it's not lost on me how important that is.
So as you look to the future, what's Gallagher's focus on the road ahead?
I think our focus is going to be very much the same. It's doing the right thing for credit unions with a focus on the long-term service and administration of executive benefit plans. A lot of the executive benefit plans that have been implemented over the past decade are what's called split dollar plans. And those plans last not just till an executive retires or until an executive gets all their retirement benefits from those plans, but those plans actually last all the way through until the executive passes away. It's going to be a concern and an asset on the credit union's books for the next 30 or 40 years. And what I see in the industry, there's lots of folks who do executive benefits, is that it really, for some, comes off as a transaction. And my fear is that in time, once the dollars from the transaction have all been spent and there's no money to support the ongoing service and administration, I'm not sure what type of support that credit unions are going to receive, especially for these very long duration benefit plans. And one of the things I love about Gallagher is we've restructured the way that we get compensated from asset placements to be spread out over the duration of those assets. And so there's revenue coming into our firm to pay for people to provide the administrative support that will inevitably be needed. And so I think the future of our firm is still going to be implementing and designing executive benefits, but increasingly as time goes on, I suspect that credit unions will view us as a tremendous resource, even for plans that we didn't implement, to provide the service and ongoing support for those benefit programs.
Oh, that sounds like you're not busy at all. So to wrap up the show, we like to have some fun with some rapid fire questions to let our listeners get to know you better. The questions are rapid, but your answers don't have to be. Do you think you're ready?
We'll see.
This is when the lights lower and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, just so you can get an understanding of where we're at here.
Yeah.
So who's someone in your life that was a great leader, and what makes them great?
I would have to say the best leader in my life was my father. As I mentioned, he was a blue collar guy. He was a mechanic for Campbell Soup. But the things that he taught me through his example is the best possible lesson in leadership that somebody could have. I mentioned that I had a paper route when I was a kid. My dad was either coming home from graveyard shift as I was leaving to do my paper route, or leaving for day shift as I was starting my paper route every single day. He worked hard, and I got to imagine that he didn't love his job the same way that I love mine. But yet he did it every single day with the best possible attitude. He always was happy and always grateful for everything that he had. And he instilled in me a work ethic that is quite honestly responsible for any success that I've had in my own life. I wouldn't have that without the lessons that he taught through example. He didn't have a lot of worldly exposure. And so he wasn't necessarily the type of leader that would tell me what I needed to do. But I knew that he cared about his family deeply. And I knew that he valued integrity and hard work above all. And just watching the way that he led our family was tremendous to me. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention Rich Brock, who, is kind of my mentor in this business. I am one of the privileged people who got to spend a ton of time with Rich, especially when we were a much smaller firm and he was running all over the country. And, he was kind enough to let me tag along. And I just learned so much about the business and how to do business the right way from him. And he was always the guy who deserved way more credit than he took for himself. I can still remember the very first board meeting that I ever did with Rich. I was an analyst. And so I was preparing all this information and had projections. And I had worked so hard on putting together the materials that we would review in the board meeting. And I was very proud of the work that I did. And we walked into the board meeting, and in true Rich fashion, he sat down and he just had a conversation with the board. He answered all their questions, and we didn't actually end up opening the presentation materials that I had put together. And as we were walking out of the board meeting, he said, "Great job." He's all, "We couldn't have done that without what you did in preparation for this." And I'm like, "Rich, I'm not dumb. I mean, we didn't even open up the materials, and I didn't say two words in the board meeting." But that was just kind of how he is. He always kind of deferred accolades to other people and gave them freely when he was just a rock star of our business. And so both of those guys, my dad and Rich, they led by example. And to me, that is the true mark of a leader. That's a little long-winded for a rapid fire. I apologize.
No, the questions are rapid, but your answer didn't have to be. And I think those were two great examples of what really shapes and creates future good leaders and leaders that were good to you. So if you're going to splurge on something and you want to treat yourself, what's one thing that you might invest in a bit?
I love investing. And so I don't necessarily splurge a ton, although you could say that I invested for several years in golf equipment that didn't really help. And I probably should have invested in lessons instead. But I guess if I'm going to splurge on something, I love watches. There's just something unique and fascinating to me about something that is hundreds of years old technology, mechanical in this very digital world that we live in. And I just like to look at the intricacies of how they work and all the different gears and stuff in there. It's just fascinating to me. So I guess it would probably be a watch of some sort.
Yeah, I will say that my algorithm has thrown me down a rabbit hole every now and then of watching people repair watches. And that does really scratch an itch for me.
We're kindred spirits, I guess.
Yeah. So if you're traveling, whether it be to go on a client visit or for work, which city are you most excited to visit?
That's a great question. Fortunate or unfortunate, I don't know how to describe it, but I travel all the time for work, and I've been in every nook and cranny of America through work, and even places overseas. I really enjoy going to Alaska. It's a fascinating place. In fact, I remember I had finished up a board meeting in Alaska and had a conference call I had to get on. And so I pulled off into the Home Depot parking lot in Anchorage. And I'm sitting there on the call in the rental car. And right in front of me, this massive moose just walks right by. And I'm completely distracted because it's just something you don't see every day. So Alaska's a very cool place to me. But if I had to choose a place, that I had to travel for work, it would be good old boring Sacramento, California, which is my hometown and where I grew up. And I still have friends from high school that I try and get together with for dinner when I'm out there. And so I really enjoy being back in Sacramento. In fact, I have a kind of a cool experience that happened to me recently at a board meeting in Sacramento. I was meeting with it was actually a compensation committee, and we were talking about a SERP for a CEO. And we had a pretty robust discussion about, what the right benefit amount was, which is often one of the biggest decisions that boards are making. And this one particular volunteer director, I could tell that he had some challenges with some of the levels of compensation that, credit union CEOs were making. And despite providing data, it just didn't really sit very well with him. And so we came to a good place and continued the discussion. And at the end, we were just kind of chatting, and I was telling him, where I grew up in Sacramento. He knew I was from there and so forth. And we got to talking, and it turns out that he worked at the exact same Campbell soup plant that my dad worked at. It was cool because it was a great reminder to me of the people that the volunteer board members represent. They're just like my parents. And not that conversations about executive benefits are in any way adversarial, but you have volunteers trying to do the right thing for their membership. And often to be competitive, it requires certain investments or, expenses of the credit union to attract the talented leaders that they need. And sometimes that's challenging for certain volunteers. And it was a cool reminder to me being back home in Sacramento, talking to this guy, who worked at the exact same soup plant that my dad did, just who I'm working for.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and certainly a full circle moment.
Yeah.
So what is one book that you think everyone should read?
I'm not a huge reader.
Book listening is also acceptable, which I know in some areas people don't feel that way. But as someone that listens to many books, I think that is a perfectly reasonable thing.
Yeah. I love binge album books, partly because they're short and easy for a guy like me to get through. But I just love the way that his books sort of bring you back to what's really important in life. I don't know if you've read any of those books, but like Tuesdays with Morrie, Have a Little Faith, One More Day, those books to me just kind of remind me about what's important. And those are our key relationships. And oftentimes you get really busy, especially me. I'm very career focused and fairly driven. And, if left to my own devices, I would spend my whole life working probably. I really do enjoy it. But his books are always a good reminder to slow down, savor the moments you have with the people around you that you care about and love, and that time is limited.
Yeah, I don't know that I would have sought it out. It was definitely on a required reading list in high school. And I remember reflecting on that quite fondly. So I had picked up quite a few of those into college as well. What is your best hack for creating balance between your work life and your life?
Robbie, here's where I should probably get out my notepad and pen and ask you the same question. I'm pretty bad at that. It's something I'm aware of and trying to work on. But as I mentioned before, I love my job and probably don't have the best balance. But thankfully, I have a wonderful wife and a couple, 3 kids who drag me into things that I may not be naturally inclined to do, and I end up, really enjoying spending time with them. But I don't know that I have a hack for that, other than when I try to be present in every moment that I'm in. And I have a wandering mind, and my mind tends to wander towards work often. And I'm constantly trying to remind myself that when I'm engaged with my friends or family, to really, really be present and really enjoy those moments. But I don't know that I have any great advice in that regard. How about you?
If someone asked me the question, I would be in the same space and just saying that I'm doing my best every day. And sometimes that looks like balance and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think I look at it as I forgive myself for the days that I have to do things that don't reflect balance, because I really appreciate it on the days that I can figure that out.
Yeah, that's so true and necessary.
Right. So we'll be sure to link to everything we talked about today in the show notes. But my last question for you is, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share or asks of our listeners?
Robbie, I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you and to, kind of share my history and perspective. In terms of final thoughts, I guess it would just be how grateful I am to work with credit unions. As I mentioned, I started my career in the banking space. Great people there, but very different from a culture standpoint. I truly value and believe in the mission of credit unions. I know the work that we do for credit unions, it's oftentimes helping the most highly compensated people in the organization get supplemental retirement programs and retention programs. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily feel like the work of Mother Teresa, but ultimately, I really see the value in what good leadership can do to an organization. And then I can see the value, and I've seen this personally in my own life, of what a credit union can do in the lives of ordinary people like myself and my parents. And so I guess my final thought would just be how much gratitude I have for the opportunity over the last 20 years to work in the credit union space. There are so many good people and great friends that I've met along the way. And for the most part, the industry is filled with people who care about people.
I love that. And thank you again, Jeremy, for being on the show. For episodes like this one and more from across the credit union movement, visit CUInsight.com to read, explore, and subscribe. Stay well, and thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in today. We'll be back again next time.